So one thing that I absolutely do not like to do on vehicles is body and paint work. That is not my specialty. I have no real interest in it, and therefore my results are always subpar because I'm always rushing and just getting through it. However, with this truck, I do want it to at least be all one color rather than the kind of motley brown and unpainted door and all that. I want it to at least be all one color. So I am going to prime this whole truck. Not my favorite thing. I'm gonna do it. The results are probably going to be not that spectacular again. However, I just gotta get through it and get this thing painted so I can start putting this thing fully back together again. Now you can see on the bed itself, I went ahead and prepped it and sanded it, hit it with Scotch-Brite. I tried to feather the edge on this a little bit so you won't see such a clear tape line where they had this. And originally the truck actually had a tape stripe on there that after 30 some odd years, maybe 40 years, that was really on there quite strongly. So getting that off there was quite a pain. I made a gigantic mess yesterday. Didn't feather this edge quite as much over here because you can't really feel it, but we'll see what happens after I get the primer on there. Well, as these things tend to do, it has snowballed a little bit here. The first coat on the bed actually did not go too bad. It actually laid out fairly nicely. I'm still having a little bit of struggles with the gun because I'm not super used to the settings that I should have on there. So we're definitely coming in a little bit heavy, but no runs or anything like that. However, on the driver's side of the bed over there, made a pretty big error. So I went ahead and waited a day, sanded that back down. I got to respray the driver's side of the bed. But that being the case, like I mentioned, I do want to have this thing all the same color, and you can tell that the color of the bed does not match the color of the cab anymore. So guess what? Now the cab is getting painted as well. So the cab is getting, I have it all scuffed and ready to go. Went ahead and taped it all up. That took absolutely forever. I hate body work. Anyway, cab's ready to go. We're gonna spray the cab and also the doors here, and then hopefully we're gonna get a chance to do the hood a little bit later today. I'm trying to get this all jammed out because we have some bad weather coming up soon. I'd like to get this done while it's hot. That also means I am sweating like crazy right now getting this done. But let's get in this thing. Let's get that cab sprayed, get these doors sprayed, get that bedside sprayed again. Let's do this thing. I'm so over body work. I hate body work. Let's move on. Hey guys, Sky from the future here. Now in this next clip where you see me lay down the first coat of primer on this truck, I have to admit something to you. I get nervous when I'm dealing with paint stuff because I don't do it very often. I don't like it. I'm trying to just get through it and get it done. So therefore, when I hooked up the airline and I went to spray, I completely 100% forgot that I was not wearing my respirator mask, and I did the entire first coat with no respirator on here. I know, I'm a complete idiot. But the moment I finished with that first coat, I was like, I'm not wearing a respirator. So don't give me too much grief for that. You'll see me wearing it throughout the rest of the painting. Well, no one will ever confuse this for somebody who actually knew what they were doing, that's for sure. But we got it laid on there nice and thick. I think I got everything done here with the doors and the cab and the bedside. Hopefully we'll get to the hood a little bit later on today. I'm grateful that everything always looks better on camera. Don't see the flaws nearly as much. There's some dry spots in there. Even though I tried to go as heavy as I could, I'm just not familiar with the paint gun, and that's the problem. Yeah, you can kind of see. Whatever, it's primer, doesn't matter. We go on the cab. I tried to get a nice heavy coat on the roof. That way, that would at least look halfway decent. It's fine. It's one of those things where, again, my entire point here was to make it all one color. There it is, guys. We have everything all painted for the truck. It is all one color now. So now we can start with our reassembly. That's a big thing I wanted off my plate. I didn't want to think about it anymore. It is done, however poorly, it is done. And now we can move on to our reassembly. So we get the bed back on this thing. We can start redoing our interior on there, and we can start plumbing our fuel system. We are getting closer and closer to our first fire up. I hope you guys stick with me to the end. Something that's very satisfying when you're done painting is taking off all of your taped off areas. And that way everything starts to look clean and nice and ready to go. So super fun, let's do that. All right, just want to give you a quick little overview of how the primer turned out. There's definitely some dry spots in here. You can kind of see, yeah, you can kind of see a little bit there, a little bit of streaks. So whatever, I'm fine with it. It's just primer. It's not like a huge deal or anything. So this side of the bed turned out nice. The other side, not so much. The tailgate looks nice, so I'm happy with how that all came out. This side, definitely a little more dry spots on here, so not as great. But the cab turned out fine. Roof has a little bit of dry spots in it, but whatever. Again, not my bag. One thing I want to do before I do anything else is I want to go ahead and put a fresh set of taillights on this truck. I just want something to kind of get hyped about, just fresh, new, reassembly, all that stuff can kind of really get you motivated. And I just want to see something nice and fresh and clean on this truck. So I'm going to throw some new bulbs in here on both sides. We'll put the new taillights on and check it out. Oh yeah, even something as simple as that. Just once you start to get a little bit of contrast in there, really gives you some motivation to keep going. Let's get the other side on. All right, so now we are moving on to our fuel system for our truck. Now, originally when I was doing this, when I pulled the original gas tanks out of there, I assumed that I was going to use the original gas tanks because this truck is not rusty. I didn't have to worry about that. However, when I took the tanks out, they had some gas that had been sitting in them for, I would say 15 years plus, and there was about a ½ inch thick of fuel residue crud all up inside the tank. And honestly, with the cost of a brand new tank, it really wasn't even worth my time to try cleaning them. So I have a brand new tank now. I don't have to worry about that. I think it was like $95 for a brand new tank. So I was like, there's no point in even trying to clean the old stuff. So that's what we have. We have a new tank here. Now I am switching it to just running a single tank. I'm getting rid of the dual tank on here because I don't want to have to run a fuel pump in both systems. Yes, it would be nice to have the extra capacity, but a 16-gallon fuel tank shouldn't be too bad. I should be able to get decent range with that. We'll see how it all works out. If I find that it's not working out for me, I can always add a second tank later on and then integrate all that wiring and plumbing that goes with that. Now, I had assumed in the beginning that this truck was fuel injected at some point from the factory because it does have a factory PCM in there. However, that is not correct. This vehicle did come with a carbureted system. I was a little bit surprised by that being at 86. It's right at that kind of crossover, that cusp there when things were changing over to fuel injection. So it is what it is, can't do anything about it now. But what that means is that my fuel hat here that comes out of the fuel tank, it does not have any sort of a provision for a fuel pump in it. You can see I bought a brand new one here because again, the old ones were so crusted over with old fuel, wasn't worth my time to try to repair those. So I have a new fuel hat now. However, I have to modify this to work with my new Walbro 255 liter per hour fuel pump. Now, the important thing here is that when you run wiring through the fuel hat, you obviously can't have any of your wiring touching the metal here. So I found a kit through a company called Racetronics that actually will allow you to wire in a fuel pump through a fuel hat. I haven't tried that at all. We're gonna give that a shot and see how that works out. It's gonna be a little bit tricky here. I'm gonna have to do some cut and modification on this thing to make my fuel pump fit in here and still have my fuel sender work like it's supposed to. And I do have some AN fittings here. They're going to go on the ends of the fuel lines themselves. That way I can convert this over to AN. As you can see, I have some braided fuel hose here. No, it is not PTFE because I have no intention of ever running E85 on this truck. So not too concerned about that. So I have the hose, I have some clamps to hold it in place. Now, another important aspect here is that this Hemi engine is a returnless style fuel system. That means there is no return coming off the fuel rail. It's just a set pressure that goes into the fuel rail. Now, to accomplish that, I'm using a Corvette fuel filter / regulator. Now, this will regulate your PSI down to 58 PSI. And that's basically approximate for what the Hemi engine will use. Most guys are using this for LS swaps in these things. It's a really nice system, easy to use. You have your inlet here and then it regulates it to 58 PSI and the rest goes right back to the tank. So nice, clean, you only have one line going up to the engine. Seems like it's gonna work out well. Now there is a couple of caveats to that. One is that the 255 liter per hour fuel pump is the maximum rating that you can use for one of these internally regulated units. Anything more than that, it'll start to push past that. And also, if you were using this on a fuel system that, or an engine that you were using in a boosted application, whether supercharged or turbocharged, you would not want to use something like this. You'd want to use an actual fuel pressure regulator after the rail so you can control fuel pressure as boost rises. But I am naturally aspirated, so not a concern for me. So I think the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to start trying to modify the fuel hat to adapt the fuel pump. Once I get that in place, I'm gonna go ahead and try to get my wiring in place for the fuel pump. And then once those are in place, I'll get this all into the fuel tank. We'll get the fuel tank reinstalled in the vehicle and start making our fuel lines. Let's get into it. One of the first things I want to do on my fuel hat here is measure where the factory pickup goes, because when I'm installing the new fuel pump, I don't want to have it end up higher or lower than the factory one, because you want this to end up right at the bottom of the fuel tank. Also, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and make sure that this fuel sending unit stays in the exact position where it is required to actually read my fuel position correctly. Otherwise, there'd be no point in having that. All right, well, that only took about forever. However, our fuel pump module assembly now is pretty much done. I have just one more thing I need to do here. Let's go ahead and see if I can slip it out of here. That's always the trickiest part. Try to get it to fit out. There we go. All right, so I'll give you a close-up of everything that I've actually done to this thing, but the very first thing I did before I started working on it was I welded on this bracket here on the back side to locate the fuel level sending unit, because clearly we don't want that to move position. So welded that bracket on, then as soon as I welded that in place, I went ahead and cut the fuel tube, the fuel feed tube, rerouted it here, went ahead and welded that up so that I could add the fuel pump itself to this system. And then I built a new bracket on the back side here for the fuel pump to mount to. So now I have my fuel pump, it's at the correct height. I still have my fuel level sending unit. This is at the correct angle as well. I went ahead and ran my Racetronics fuel wiring setup through the fuel hat. Kind of tough. There wasn't a lot of super flat areas here to actually get that put in place, but seems like it's going to work. I don't think it's going to have any kind of leaks there. The last thing I did is I went ahead and put some AN adapter fittings onto my tubes here, my fuel feed and my fuel return. So the pump module is pretty much ready. The very last thing I have to do is cut off one of these ears here real quick, and then we can get this thing installed. We can get our fuel pump back in our truck and start building our lines. There we go, fuel pump module's installed. Let's get this fuel tank back in the truck. Made up a couple of AN lines here for both the feed and the return from the pump to the fuel filter. I mounted that on the frame rail there. I'll show you that in a moment. It's really nice because it has that integrated regulator in it so that you can run just short hoses from there to there. Now we have the long feed hose to do from the fuel filter all the way up to the fuel rail itself. So this is actually my first time making up a set of AN lines, and actually it was much easier than I thought it would be. I'm not sure what the issue is. People make this out to be a really hard thing, and in my mind it was extraordinarily simple. So I don't know if I did it wrong. I mean, this is my first time doing it, so, but it was actually a very, very simple process, not difficult at all. So if it's something that you're hesitating about with these AN fittings, don't. It was not a big deal to do that. So hopefully here's the first time I turn the key, all these things don't blow apart, but I don't see how that's possible. I think I've got them together just like they should be. I'm not really concerned about it. I'm ready to move on to the next steps. So what I need to do is I need to go ahead and get these things screwed onto the fuel tank. We're gonna go ahead and get that fuel tank installed, hopefully for the final time, and then we can start making up our final feed line going up to the fuel rail. Now the downfall here of making these lines essentially identical is that I don't want to confuse my feed and my return lines. So after I get this feed line on, I'm gonna go ahead and throw some tape on it real quick just so I can mark it. That way I know that that is in fact the feed line. Got the feed and the return all hooked up on there. The lines are tucked back out of the way. I like this spot for the fuel filter as well because it's pretty much as far away from the exhaust as you can get in this area. So that's a nice little touch there. So the lines are routed there. Now I just need to do my feed line all the way up from there. Got our feed line all finished up here. Basically just a ICT billet fitting here, adapter for the stock fuel rail, 90-degree fitting there. Then goes back to the firewall where I have a series of clamps to hold the line in place. And then down here on this side, runs down the firewall and then tucks back to go underneath down onto the frame rail to the fuel filter. Now you can see there, I have about maybe 1.5 inches or so of air gap between the header and the fuel line. I think I am going to put some sleeving on there to protect that just a little bit, but overall, I'm really happy with how clean this came out. I think it follows the lines very nicely, nice and clean there. Doesn't touch on the booster. Anyway, I think that's it for our fuel system. It's ready to go. Let's move into the interior again. So one issue with this dash here is that there is no under panel here. Well, I think there was originally, but it never would have fit with the way this column is. So I'm just gonna build something out of sheet metal that just kind of comes down and covers it for the most part, just to take care of some of this ugly wiring in here. So that's what I'm gonna work on right now, and then we can finally assemble the interior. Well, this project quickly escalated, as these things always do. I was just going to make a simple panel that would cover up some of the wiring on the underside of the steering column because it is kind of obvious and I don't want it to be, you know, just right in your face when you get inside the vehicle. There's a bunch of wiring hanging down in the steering column. So I was just gonna make a simple panel, but instead that kind of morphed into me building this entire knee bolster panel, which actually I think fits pretty nicely and accomplishes the job I wanted to do as far as hiding things a little bit better in there. Now, I didn't really film any of making this because it doesn't seem like you guys are all that interested in this fabrication work. All the videos that I have that are featuring fabrication work have done really, really poorly. I know it's not specifically Hemi and Challenger stuff, but I was hoping a little bit more people would be into that sort of thing because that is my passion. It's something I really enjoy doing. So if it is something that you guys like seeing on the channel with the fabrication, send me a comment, put something in there, like the video, do whatever you can, try to amp these videos up a little bit. I know it's not the most exciting thing in the world to do fabrication, but I think the results are really cool that you can basically come up with something that was never there to begin with. You're creating something from scratch. I absolutely love that, my favorite thing. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and get this panel thrown in. I'll go ahead and bolt it up real quick and show you what it looks like in the car. There we go. Now all that wiring down there is going to get all tucked up and hidden away, but you can't see all the wiring underneath the column anymore, and that was really the goal here. Yeah, pretty darn happy with how that came out. I like it a lot. All right, you guys, that's gonna do it for this episode of the C10. Lots more C10 content coming. Hope you guys are enjoying following along. I got a lot of really good stuff coming up in the next episode, so make sure you stay tuned for that. We'll see you next time on Reignited.